I'm Carlos Saisi of ESPN LA, and welcome to the Road to Recovery. It's only week one of the NFL, and we've already got some big news. Lucky to be joined by Dr. Alan Beyer of the Hoag Orthopedic Institute. Dr. Beyer, Aaron Rodgers. That's on top of everybody's mind right now. Just 4 plays into his career with the New York Jets, and he's down and out for the rest of the season with a torn Achilles.
You know, the Jets have never been the luckiest team in professional football when it comes to injuries, but this is right up there in terms of maybe the unluckiest thing that's ever happened to them. Everybody was waiting with so much anticipation about Aaron coming and filling that QB role. That was the one biggest weak spot that they had last season. And now you've lost him for the season. I mean, potentially, who knows? He's 39 years old. Have you lost him for his career? Knowing Aaron Rodgers, I don't think that's the case, but he's certainly not going to be there this season.
What did you see when it happened? And to you, your immediate thought was that really a torn Achilles?
Well, you knew it was something at or about the ankle when you saw the slow mo, you saw the contortion that the ankle went through, the angle that it went through. I was unclear in my own mind whether it was an ankle fracture, possibly a midfoot problem, like a Lisfranc dislocation that you see in a lot of football players, or an Achilles. Now, an Achilles, it's really easy to make the diagnosis. They knew by the time they got to the blue tent what was going on. They didn't need an MRI scan. Of course, they did one for verification, but the team physicians knew what was going on by then. We've seen so many of these Achilles injuries in basketball players, say, in Kobe, in Kevin Durant. We actually saw the calf almost reverberate when the Achilles suddenly popped and the calf almost rolls up on itself. A little harder to see that with a football uniform on than it is on a basketball player. But the hallmarks were there. The mechanism of injury was there. Fortunately, it's something that can be fixed. It's a long rehabilitative process, but at least there's hope for next season.
Now, you mentioned Kobe. Kobe's sitting right here over my shoulder. I was really fortunate enough to be at the game when Kobe tore his Achilles and in the locker room, and you could see the pain in his eyes, the emotion in his eyes, looking at the rehab process. You mentioned, Dr. Beyer, that he's out for the season, but could we see him return in his career? I remember in that Kobe locker room that he was asked, is this the end of Kobe? And he laughed it off. What do you think about somebody like you mentioned, Aaron Rodgers being at 39 years old, already a storied Hall of Fame career? What is that journey like coming back from an Achilles injury?
I actually think that for a football player, even a quarterback who's got to be somewhat mobile, even though Aaron Rodgers is never known as the most mobile, he's no Lamar Jackson, the most mobile quarterback on the field, he should be able to come back and perform at his previous level after he's successfully rehabilitated. When Kobe tore his Achilles tendon, I remember saying to a bunch of friends of mine, there goes his shooting percentage for the next couple of years. Because for a basketball player, to even lose, say, a quarter of an inch of their vertical leap, which can easily happen after an Achilles tendon repair, because to repair it, you sometimes have to shorten the tendon a little bit to get the ends to come together as you repair it. You could lose a quarter inch or a half inch of your vertical leap. For a basketball player, that's career suicide. You're going to hit the front of the rim with every shot. For a football player, that's not the case. And I think that there's every expectation that Aaron Rodgers should be able to come back from this injury and perform if he wants to, if he so desires.
In that rehab process, what does the therapy look like?
So for the first 6 weeks after the injury, the player or patient is in a boot, which immobilizes the foot and ankle. You don't want to put any tension on the repair that you've done. You usually put them in that boot with the foot in what we call a plantar flexed position, toes pointing somewhat down to relax the Achilles tendon and let it really heal. And then over that first few weeks, you slowly increase the amount that you bring the foot up back to a plantar grade position, a flat position, so the patient can walk without their toes pointing down all the time, so they can start to weight bear and walk without crutches. Once the boot in the old days it was a cast. These days we use those big old black boots. When the boot comes off, then it's just a slow process of slowly getting the range of motion back, not putting any stress on the repair, not forcing it in any way. And then once the range of motion is back, you start the strengthening process because he's going to have a lot of atrophy of his calf muscles, going to have a little bit of atrophy of his quadriceps and hamstrings too, because he's not weight bearing normally and walking normally for that first 4 to 6 week period. So it's just getting the muscles back to be able to perform at the NFL level, and that just takes time.
Now, time is something that Aaron Rodgers may not have in his career compared to a young guy like J.K. Dobbins, who also tore his Achilles in week one. Now, Dr. Beyer, those are two interesting, very, very interesting cases because the NFLPA came out today and talked about, and even Aaron Rodgers' former teammate David Bakhtiari complained about how the NFL needs to make a move about how the playing surfaces affect these injuries. The NFLPA wanting to say that natural grass is better and more safe for players than artificial turf. Dobbins was on grass where Rodgers was on turf. What's the difference and what does that mean for the body?
So natural turf has been fighting AstroTurf. Interestingly, it was originally called AstroTurf because it was developed for the Houston Astros field, the first indoor stadium down in Houston, Texas, where you couldn't get sun, so you had to have artificial grass. Um, this has been an age-old discussion about which is safer. Um, ask the players in last year's Super Bowl how much they love natural grass because they weren't too happy with the state-of-the-art grass that was supposedly flown into Arizona for the Super Bowl last year. So it's not that easy, a black and white decision about how, oh, they're just going to turf because of financial reasons. It's cheaper to maintain, obviously. It gets a little bit hotter on the field with artificial turf than with natural turf because it's got concrete right underneath it, which holds heat. So in a really hot environment, it's pretty darn hot on an artificial turf field if you're playing in a locale where the temperature is an issue. Injuries occur on both. We're never going to get rid of these kinds of injuries in football. It's a contact sport. Your cleats can get caught, whether it's grass or whether it's turf. You need to use different cleats depending on what surface you're playing on. And this is a mistake that's made sometimes where teams don't realize, even from artificial turf to artificial turf, the formulations are different. They're not all the same. Different companies make different densities and length of the fibers and how much of the rubber pellets they throw down there when it's new. So every artificial turf field is somewhat different and sometimes needs a different cleat than a different one. So this is really, really not a simple, straightforward, oh, grass is better, we should go back to grass, hang the expense. The players are getting hurt more on artificial turf. I mean, I think we have to weigh that with the fact that how many high schools and small colleges couldn't afford to maintain a natural grass field. So the alternative is if we don't go to an artificial turf field, we're not going to have soccer or football or any of those sports that you play on a field. So you really have to weigh the balances. It's not a simple black and white question as to whether we should all be playing on natural grass and all be playing on turf. Natural grass gets holes in it. It gets chuck holes. And a player can turn an ankle by stepping in a hole on a natural grass field. So it's just not a simple question to ask. And of course, as always, as in anything political, there's always money involved. The companies that make the artificial turf fields are obviously going to lobby and show studies about how they're safer than grass fields and vice versa. So there's no right answer. And I don't know that we'll ever have a right answer.
If you had a say, like, would you make any changes to the surfaces? Because the way that you talked about it, I hope that the Players Association has somebody to refer to like you.
Well, I think that natural grass fields are more forgiving. They're softer. I like natural grass for concussion prevention. When you come down and hit your head on an artificial turf field, that's a harder surface that you're hitting your head on than on a natural grass field. So I actually prefer natural grass for the fact that it's somewhat more forgiving when you fall and land on it. You're less likely to maybe fracture a forearm or some other thing that can happen with a fall on an outstretched hand. I also kind of like I'm a traditionalist. I like the old games back in the day when they played on a frozen field of ice, and the equipment manager. I just had on my radio show this week the equipment manager for the San Francisco 49ers. Those guys are sometimes the unsung hero. They figure out which cleat or sneaker. I still remember the New York Giants Baltimore Colts game back 60 years ago when the Giants figured out we got to wear sneakers because the field is ice, and they won the game because of their footwear choice. I like that kind of stuff. That doesn't happen with artificial turf. That whole tradition laden history that we go back years and years to doesn't happen.
On a side note, Dr. B, we have Cooper Kupp here at the Rams now placed on the injured list, and his hamstring is still continuing to bother him. Any update on your end?
Clearly a more significant injury than you and I initially surmised when we talked about it back in training camp. We thought he'd be back at week 1. Clearly, the degree of injury and his response to it, his inflammatory response to it, is somewhat worse than we originally thought it was going to be. You got to just play it week to week. By being on IR now, he's got 4 weeks to really get himself back into shape. That should be enough. I've seen these hamstring injuries sometimes linger 6, 8 weeks. You just got to play it week by week. How's the player progressing? How's his pain level? How's his strength coming along? I hope Cooper will be back by week 5.
Yeah, from a Rams perspective, Rams fans got to be happy that wide receivers Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell are stepping up in his place. But the Rams offense won't be the same without Cooper Kupp, whether they do step up or not. Dr. Beyer, thank you very much for joining us this week to talk about Aaron Rodgers and a little bit about Cooper Kupp. We're looking forward to our next chat on the road to recovery.
I have a feeling the way the NFL season usually plays out, it's not going to be long till we're talking again. And listen for me on AM 830, 12 noon, Doctor in the Dugout every Saturday.